We are recording, and so this is second lecture of at least PowerPoint on covering this concept of Bootstrap. And again, the whole point is to dive into the classes of Bootstrap a little bit more, so that we understand the code that we're writing and not just copying and pasting necessarily from the documentation. Okay. And so again, these PowerPoints that were created come straight from the documentation. And so you can see the sources are as always getbootstrap.com, documentation, 4.5, and then, the whole path. Um, so in order to understand Bootstrap, a really important concept is the grid system. And since CSS positioning and getting things, moved around on the page was one of the hardest concepts, dealing with CSS. The grid system, essentially replaces that positioning. And so we do have Flexbox, and you've seen how we can use Flexbox with Bootstrap. But the grid system is essentially another way of getting things into rows and columns that is inherently responsive in nature. And so, in order to use this grid system, there's just a couple of rules. And the first rule is that you have to have a container. And so, a container, we're actually familiar with containers, and what they call a container in Bootstrap is very similar to what we were calling a wrapper in HTML and CSS. Essentially, um, containers contain all of the content on the page. And so you see here, just a couple of notes. Containers are the most basic layout element in Bootstrap that are required. So when we're studying this grid system for page layout, the first rule is that you need a container. Containers are used to contain, pad, and center the content within them. Containers provide the simplicity and predictability of fixed layouts with a responsive twist. And you'll also notice here, containers should never be nested, so you do not want to have nested containers. Um, Keeping in mind that Bootstrap is a mobile first platform, it always deals with um, elements scaling up. And so when you have a class of container, the class of container uh, is, again, when we look at our different devices, we've got cell phones, kind of like portrait cell phones, is extra small. Landscapes cell phones or really big cell phones would be considered small. Our medium devices are our tablets. Small laptops are this large device, and extra large devices are large laptops. And so when you just style something with container on a cell phone, it's going to be 100% width. Then, depending on the device that you're on, it will set a maximum width. And you'll see here the maximum width is just underneath the breakpoint. And so, if you're looking at a large device that is greater than 768 pixels but less than 992, okay, the container is going to be 960 pixels of the 992. And so what you find out that if you style a class with container, it's 100% width on the cell phone, and then it's almost 100% width on all of these other devices. It's just a little bit under the 100% width. It's 540 pixels of the 560 or 575, right? So maybe that's about a 95% width. And so you could see here the container class will set a max width at each responsive breakpoint. So it grows up until it hits 540 pixels and then it stops. So let's just do this. Let's just deal with a container class with Bootstrap, and I'll do a small code example on this. just demonstrating how container works. And this is chapter 12. Give this a second to catch up. Come on, come on. There it is. We'll go to getbootstrap.com. Click on Get Started. We'll copy the starter template. The only thing that is recommended that's not this starter template, if you remember, I mentioned this before, is to replace the version of jQuery instead of a slim version to do a full version, right? Otherwise, the starter template works out pretty well. And so the way that we do a container is typically on a div. And so let's launch this. And so we're doing a container just to show, just to show how it works. And if I inspect this, if I see the container, you can see that I've got a pretty widescreen monitor. We have a max width of 1200 pixels. And so this is actually what's being, max width of 1140, there it is. Max width of 1140 pixels. And if I go back to my PowerPoint, you could see that's on an extra large device. We got a max width of 1140 pixels. So that's actually a lot smaller than 95%, I'd say. That's maybe on an extra large device, and I'm just guessing here, that's maybe, 60% or so. So container's actually pretty small for this extra large device. We're actually got a lot of leftover white space. And so that's a good thing to see. Now if I go back to my PowerPoint here, now the way that container and container small, these two are exactly the same as far as the way they work. Okay, so this other class of container small. Container medium though, is 100% width on both of these sort of cell phone breakpoints. And so instead of being a max width of 540 pixels, it would be a max width all the way up to the medium-sized devices. And then container large, container extra large. Otherwise, all these breakpoints, and they look all the same. So really, the one difference that I can look on a widescreen monitor, the one thing I can display would be the difference between container and container fluid, right? Because no matter which class I decorate here, since I'm on a large device, really the only other thing I can display without, using the developer tools would be container fluid. So let's change our container from container to container fluid. And now container fluid, you could see here has a width of 100%. And so if you want a wrapper that's 100%, you could add container fluid. You could see there's a little bit of padding there. To the left. So that's really all. Just kind of what's built into Bootstrap is that padding. So those are your basics of containers. Again, the important things here, you don't nest containers, and they are required when using the grid. So if we're gonna use a grid with rows and columns, then that's what we want to do. And you can kind of see the differences there at the different breakpoints and how they work. And that, the thing that I remember when I was first learning this is, boy, all these breakpoints for these containers are just under their the maximum widths are set just underneath their breakpoints. Okay, so when it comes to the grid system, again, the grid system is how we lay things out. Um, we just did chapter 11, so I think this is what yeah, the tables is chapter 12, so uh, we just covered chapter 12 PowerPoint before this, how to work with tables. And so we could view this as the lecture of 12.2. Okay, so a couple simple rules. Rule number one, you got to use a container if you're going to use a grid. Um, Really, the common containers are container and container fluid, although you could see how they all slightly work a little bit different at the different breakpoints. Okay, the grid system. There's a magic number here when it comes to this grid system. So an important number is it's a 12 column system, and so that number 12 um, will show you how many columns um, that you get per row. For example, if you just want one item per row, you set that item to take up 12 spaces. Okay, if you want two items per row, in other words, you want two columns, you can do 6 and 6. And so you have to add up to 12 is really all you get at. If you want three items per row, you could do 4, 4, and 4. Obviously, if you want 4, you can add up 3s. If you want 6, you can add up 2s. And if you want 12 columns in an individual row, you can add up all the individual ones. And so what you're looking at when it comes to the grid. Um, Now, again, something else is that this is built on top of Flexbox. Okay, so what you get out of this grid system is an automatic, um, responsiveness. And so let's just do something. Let's take a look at an example, and we'll code this. So here's an example of a grid system. Div class of container. So containers are required, and we saw that that's a requirement. After the container, we need to have a row. And so I didn't really have a bullet that says you need a container and you need a row, but you need a class of rows. So another hard requirement here is to have a class of row. And then inside of that row, your columns have to add up to 12. So when you have call hyphen, again, this is mobile first. So call hyphen is to say that this format of your first cell is 4 of the 12 spaces, and your 8th cell is 8 of the 12 spaces. So it would be like 1/3 and 2/3 width. And what it does is this scales up. So since we don't have any other abbreviation like we do everywhere else, this is kind of like the container. Container doesn't have an abbreviation. So that's from extra small and all the way up. So when it comes to the grid system, if we say call for, that's for extra small, small, medium, large, and extra large devices. So this is going to scale up. And so let's just copy this code and paste it in here. And if I format this and launch it, this is the result. Now if I inspect it, you can see a little bit better. Again, the container you can see has a max width of 1140 pixels. We talked about why that is. So if we look at the the blue area, you could see that column 1 takes up about 1/3, and you could see that column 2 takes up 2/3 space. And the reason for that is because of call-4 and call-8. If we wanted them to be even, we could do 6 and 6. So now, inside of our row, we've got 2 even columns. And again, this would be all the way down. So obviously, we can scale this down, and it's going to remain 2 columns because it's mobile first. So it does mobile first, and then at all the different breakpoints, it's remaining that 50-50 split. You know, if you wanted to see this a little bit better, you could put borders or background colors or anything like that on it. So if we want to apply breakpoints though, we could say, okay, at an extra small, I want 1 column. And then on medium up, I want, let's say I want extra small at on a small and up. I'm sorry, small and up. I want 1 column, and then large and up, I want 3 columns. We could just make that the case. Okay, so you do call hyphen, and then the breakpoint, and then the number. Okay, so let's just take a look at this example, and then I'll just make one up after this. Okay, we've got our container, we've got our row. These are required. Call medium 4. Well, again, so you start at the medium breakpoint and you work your way up. So 4, 4, and 4, that's 3 columns. So at medium, large, and extra large, you're going to have 3 columns. But since we didn't specify anything beneath medium, the default behavior is a single column. So for small and extra small, you automatically get a single column. So that's because of just the default behavior. Okay, so medium, large, and extra large would be 3 columns, and then medium down, small, I should say, uh, small down, is a single column. So let's do an example. So here's the example. So on extra small and small, I want 1 column. On medium, two columns. Large and extra large, I want 3 columns. So obviously to have 3 columns, we need a third. Instead of calling this number 1, 2, and 3, I'll just call it 1, 2. Okay, you get the 1 column for free, as you saw in that last example. So I'll do for medium column, call hyphen medium. You know you want 6. You want 6 and 6. Call medium 6. And so what the default's going to be is you're going to get call medium 6. And then for large and up, we want 3 columns. Call large hyphen, well, to get that, we want 4. We want 4, 4, and 4. Call large 4. Call large 4. And this is number 3. So by default, large, obviously we get our 3. At a certain breakpoint, it goes down to 2. So here's 3. At a certain breakpoint, it goes down to 2 items per row, right? Which is what we wanted. And then at the next breakpoint, it goes down to single column for free. So that's another example of working with the grid system. Again, so what's great about this is that your positioning's done in rows. Your rows automatically can stack, in different um, configurations depending on what you want and what looks good for your page. And even if I could take this and add a fourth one. Let's just see how that looks. Because again, at the large, now we're going to have 2 rows. At the large, we have 2 rows. At the medium, we've got 2 rows. And then down at the small, we've got 1. Okay? So that's the basics of your grid system. Another example here. Example number 3. So we've got a container, we've got our row. At medium, it adds up to 12. So at a medium device, we're going to get 3 columns. And at a large, we got call large of 2, so a large will add up to be 6. So here at the large devices, we get 6. So large and extra large, you can see we got 6 columns. Oh, I'm sorry, that's just called XL. So at the extra large, we get 6. Medium and large, then we get 3. And then automatically, since we don't specify anything smaller than medium for our small and extra small, the default behavior is to go down to 1. So that's your fundamentals of your grid system. Okay, it's not too bad once you get into it, but I tell you what, if you never had this overview, I will tell you I spent a lot of time um, dissecting this when I was new to Bootstrap, and so to understand how it works, not too complicated once you have it explained or you see it once. So hopefully this lecture was helpful.